Hello, and welcome to this introduction to the King James Bible overview, where I'm going to be talking through how to implement some of the ideas in this module for Year 8. Okay, so let's think about what's intended, what we intend students to learn. So this is the overview, and it's the big idea is that the Bible is a hugely influential text that has influenced both English literature as well as the English language. So we're really not studying it as a religious text. We're looking at its literary and linguistic merits, and so it's a particular lens that we're going for here, because the idea is that if students understand the Bible's relationship with the rest of literature and language, then they'll have a much richer understanding of the subject. So these are the sorts of things that are going to be going on. And so we'll talk a bit more about this as we go and how the fluency lessons worked. So, and that's the point that I made at the beginning, that it's not about studying a work of religion, it's about studying a work of literature. So these are the bits that we're going to be particularly picking out. So they'll be looking at various extracts from the Bible. They're not reading the whole of the Bible, I hope you'll be pleased to know. They'll be looking at things like, as it says there, sort of bits, some medieval mystery plays inspired by the Bible. So they'll look at creation, they'll look at Noah's Ark, they'll look at all the big hitters, all of the most famous stories, Samson and Delilah, David and Goliath, all of that sort of stuff. And then when you see the conceptual breakdown there, the metaphor, story, arguments, and so on, those are the aspects of underlying knowledge that are being explicitly taught in this unit. And we'll talk about how they unpick as we go on. So one of the first and most important things with all of our units is that you look first at the curriculum-related expectations. So this is very, very early on in the teacher guide. So if you look at your teacher guide, I think it's page 3 or 4, something like that. And what we've done here is we've highlighted the bits in yellow that are crucial, that students really, really, really need to understand in order to do well. Just want to flag one thing, that the deconstructed essay, which students are being taught over the 3 years of Key Stage 3, so in Year 7 they're taught sentences 1, 3 and 4, and in Year 8 they're taught 5, 6 and 7. So by this point they should be ideally they're able to use 1, 3, 4, 5 and starting to teach 6. That should be where we are with this unit. But obviously you need to be really aware of gaps, because if your students haven't had that experience in Year 7, that you started teaching this in Year 8, you'll need to do some backfilling. And it's important. That obviously that makes it a bit more constrained, but it's something you really need to be aware of. But if you get it right, obviously the payoff is that we're going to be assessing students' knowledge and mastery of the CREs. So if you've taught them, they'll be able to do well in the assessment. Obviously, if there's anything missing, they'll do less well in the assessment. So, as always, the recommendation is to use the assessments as a tool, not so much to say where children have done badly or well, but to look at how effective the implementation of the curriculum is. So, if students are not getting things right, the assumption should be either there was a gap in the curriculum, in which case get back in touch with us and we'll try and fix that, or there was an issue with implementation and that will be your end. And so again, that's something we can help you with. So here's the the sample assessment that's included with this unit. You don't have to do all of these questions, but they're all designed to assess particular constructs. So one of the really important guiding principles here is that the focus of assessment is narrowed so that how students perform on a particular question reveals, or should reveal, how well they have understood and mastered and practiced a particular concept. So that first question there's a piece of reading to use from the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den, great story. And then the first question, 1A, is assessing their ability to summarise. Now that's something they should have been taught, something that they'll have practiced in Year 7, but they should still be being taught in Year 8. So there's a tip off there that's something that you need to be doing. and that's if they recognise a summarised question, they know we look at who, what, where, when, why, then they should be fine with that. And then in the second part of that is looking at their ability to combine disparate elements into a single sentence. So if you've taught it, they should be able to do it. If you haven't taught it, then some of them will struggle. The second question is recalling epithets. We'll look at that in a moment. And then you can see some examples of thesis statement writing and so on. So there's quite a lot on this particular assessment. As I say, you don't have to do all of it. Some of it's simple recall, some of it's a little bit more analytical. If I just go back here, there's quite a few questions, 5, 6 and 7. They're all questions on analysing metaphor. So that's a reminder that you need to be teaching tenor, vehicle and ground. That's flagged at various points in the teacher guide. If you're not doing it, students are going to come a cropper with those questions. If you are doing it, they should find them straightforward. There's a separate video on using tenor and vehicle ground on the National College. You go if you want to, you can go all the way to question 18, which is a short bit of creative writing, and those sentence types ought all to have been explicitly taught by this stage in the curriculum, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. The other bit of assessment that, just to remind you, that should be going on all the time, is that you should be asking questions and having discussions and getting students to do things which will reveal whether or not they've grasped what you're trying to teach. So I think this works with pretty much everything that you ask. You get students to do something, you ask them a question. The first thing that you ask is, did everybody in the class get it right? And we're always ambitious for 100% of students to get the answer right. If they're not, then we take responsibility for that collectively. So if the answer to that is no, did any of them? And if the answer to that is no, then that's obviously either a problem with the curriculum, let me know, or a problem with your delivery of the curriculum, have a think. If, though, some students got it right, if some of them did, then the next question to ask is, how many of them? Did most of them? And what do we mean by most? And as I say, I think we should be really ambitious for 100%. If you've only got 80% of children getting it right, then that's a fifth of students not understanding something potentially crucial. So I think that's writing off 1 in 5 kids is way too much. And so you've got to be, the inference that you should draw, if 80% or so get the answer right, but 20% don't, back to the drawing board. We've got to take responsibility for that. So that would be my advice there. If, though, all the students did get it right, and if they most, that's great. If they all did get it right, brilliant. But the next question is that the first time? Have they gotten it right before? And if the answer to that is no, then you know they're going to forget it again. If they've got it right several times, brilliant. That's what we want. Still, they'll probably forget it. So make it part of your carousel practice if you're using carousel to implement the curriculum. If you're not, I can send you the question banks and you can use those in whatever way works best for you. So one of the essential bits of the curriculum is the vocabulary, way we do vocabulary. So the first thing is that you've got lots of topic vocabulary. So we'll look at the excellent epithets at the moment. So all of that, for this unit, all of the topic vocab is the excellent epithet vocabulary, and it's all specified in the teacher guide. There's various points at which there's optional vocabulary that you could teach, and it's up to you. It won't be assessed. It might be enriching. Make the decision on the ground for your class. Looking at the vocabulary triangle here, this is the strategy for teaching vocab. So we've got the word implacable there. One of the most important things to do is to get everyone in the class to say the word aloud. So I'm teaching you this new word, implacable. Let's say it together. Implacable. What could go wrong here is that students think somehow that's how you spell it. So you have to be absolutely clear that they do not ever say. Maybe don't even show them that phonetic spelling. The next thing they need to do is to be able to spell it. So take away the words. Think about how it breaks down. Plaque. How's plaque likely to be spelt? And the etymology helps us here. And then able, common suffix for adjectives. So get them to spell it. Mini whiteboards, your friend here. So 1, 2, 3, hold up your word, great. Oh, okay, it's able, not ibble. That kind of thing. Looking at the etymology, as I said, placatus, about soothing, calming down, so you can see the relationship to a word like placate there, and you can see how you could how the different bits of implacable all work. And then we've got the flexible definition, the definition of inflexible and unforgiving. And that's the way I recommend teaching the topic vocabulary. You don't look up a dictionary definition, which some of your students, which it takes a lot of time. You have to invest in them understanding the dictionary definition. So much better to use tier 1 synonyms and say it's a bit like something you already know, and they'll more likely to grasp it. So if they do those, if they've all said it, if they've all spelt it, and they all know what it means in terms of what it's similar to, then they are more likely than not to retain it. But obviously, the more frequently you do that, the more likely they are to learn those topic vocabulary words. There's lots of subject terminology in all of our units. There's an example of some of the terminology from this unit, and the advice there is to use Carousel if you're subscribed to it, to use Carousel to get them to rote learn the agreed definitions. Now, you don't have to agree with my agreed definitions. You can tweak those to your heart's content, but I think it's important that students have fingertip recall of these things so that they don't have to think about it, so that by the time they get to Key Stage 4, they just know what these things are. And that will free up lots of capacities for them to think about more interesting things. So the key there is that Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocab is taught differently. So that's something to consider. Now, here are some of the epithets. There's more than this. There's ones for Tyndale and Noah and David. And the advice, as always with the epithets, is not to teach them as standalone things, that you're activating them through the thesis statements, which we'll just reiterate in a moment. Also, don't neglect the appositives that are used here. So appositive use is a big part of what we're trying to get students fluent in. So swapping in different noun phrases for the characters in this case that they're going to be encountering. And as with all vocabulary, the more regularly students encounter and retrieve these things, the more likely they are to retain them. This is where you're using the vocab triangle. Precision isn't essential. So that's the epithets. That takes us to thesis statements. I'm going to suggest, and it's not a rule, it's up to you, it's a suggestion, a recommendation, that your students ought to be writing at least one thesis statement every lesson. If they're not, they're probably not getting sufficient practice. Now, obviously, if your students have been doing this all the way through Year 7, they'll be really good at it already. If they haven't, all the more reason to do it. They're quick, they're easy to give feedback on. Get them to do them on mini whiteboards so you can see at a glance what everyone's doing. There's a sort of question that I would pose in order to get students to write a thesis statement. So why was Tyndale good at translating the Bible? There he is, by the way. And then there's the thesis statement. Although he was an erudite scholar, also used and a positive there, Tyndale was also dauntless and implacable in the face of threats and discouragement in his determination to produce a Bible in English. It's quite a chewy mouthful, that particular thesis statement. And then the key here with flexible vocabularies, we're taking those adjectives and we're being really, really clear to students, and this is part of the deconstructed essay approach, that it's relatively limited use to know one iteration of a word. To know erudite is great, but if you don't know that erudite changes to erudition, then you are more limited. And if students only know the adjective form and not the noun form, for instance, they'll end up torturing sentences to make the version of the word they know fit, which just makes them look less clever. So giving them flexible vocabulary, talking about dauntlessness as well as dauntless, implacability as well as implacable. So because they have to do that in order to write topic sentences, that's partly why. So this is just to remind you that you've been doing this already. This is the process for writing topic sentences. As you can see, just breaking it, I find it very useful with students to break it down, noun, phrase, verb, link to question, and also showing there that there's Some noun phrases can be really long, like the dauntlessness with which Tyndale approached translating the Bible. That's quite a long noun phrase, or it can be really short, like his implacability. So it's lots and lots of practice, as always. If they've been doing this all the way through year 7, great. If it's new to them in year 8, they need lots of practice now. And then these are the other bits, the deconstructed essay. So sentence 4, using selecting and embedding evidence. There's a little video on how to do that on the National College. There are, by the way, for sentences 1 and 3, the 2 I just showed you, they're on National College too. And sentence 5 that will have been taught during the sonnet unit, if you're doing that. And then sentence 6, which is new for this unit. So students, you're doing first teaching of the evaluate sentence this unit. Have a quick look at the evaluate sentence on the National College to check how to teach it, if you're not sure. But hopefully it's not too different from things you've been doing in the past. And you'll find it relatively straightforward. But this is the first time that students are explicitly encountering this in the curriculum. So this is where it needs that really explicit teaching. Also, as well as all of that, you've also got to be mindful of the slow writing, the creative writing strand of students' development. So this is the slow writing page from the teacher guide for the Bible. And so the 3 sentence types that are being explicitly taught in this unit are the past participle start, and the whoever, whenever, whichever, and the adjective attack. So you can see there's some examples of each of those 3 there. There's then a reminder that those other 13 sentences should have been previously taught. Now, again, if you've just started in year 8, you can't assume that students know all of those. So you might have to do some additional explicit teaching to catch up. But the idea is that they're constantly retrieving ones they've practiced and mastered previously. Then you've got a sample task. So the advice here is that you should do these sorts of tasks really regularly throughout. So there's one. Imagine you're Goliath. How do you feel when you see that puny little fella with a sling walking towards you? And then there's the way in which slow writing works is that children are given sentence level prescriptions that they have to meet. And you can see that there's 5 sentences there. And then there's a model. So you can see how that might work. You're welcome to show children that model and talk it through with them and put it under the visualizer, discuss how it meets the different criteria, but then do your own version. Give a different slow writing task. Could be about anything. Use a visual prompt, whatever seems appropriate, and then get them to replicate. So there's the reminder. Teach the specified sentence types. Recall the previously learned ones. Be really aware of gaps caused by you perhaps not having taught this earlier in their sequence, and regular slow writing practice. The question in the assessment is exactly the same. If they've had regular practice, they will not be tripped up. The assessment asks them about those 3 sentences in particular. They need to know them in order to succeed in the assessment, so make sure you teach them and practice them. Right, on to the student anthology. So one clear bit of advice here is that you don't read every text to death. Don't analyse them to death. Don't annotate everything that's in the anthology. Think really carefully about whether you want any annotation in the anthology at all. Obviously, if students write in the anthology, then they're not a sustainable resource. You'll have to get more copies in the future. So it's up to you whether or not you want that to happen. But you certainly don't have to do that in order to be successful. In the teacher guide, we've flagged various of the texts in the anthology as fluency texts, where you would be modelling and students echoing back your reading. So just do that with quite a few of them. So, for instance, with the medieval mystery play, not a murder, about Noah's Ark. That works really well as a fluency text. Don't analyse it. Just ask a few questions as you go. The focus should always be on enjoyment. And so reading aloud, bringing it to life, doing a bit of echo reading fluency where appropriate. That's the method. So the advice that I would be, rather than taking things that are in the student anthology and putting them on a PowerPoint. You can do that, but it's time consuming. There's a workload cost to that. Instead, just slip your copy of the anthology under your visualizer and direct students' attention to what you want them to see. If you want them to be doing any annotation, you can do it there, or you can at least show them your thinking process. But where possible, the anthology and the guide have been designed so that you don't have to make PowerPoints. If you're making PowerPoints, it's fine. There's nothing to stop you, but you're doing something that you don't need to do. On the subject of that, there's a hyperlink there to the images slide deck, where various of the images that are used in the anthology are actually already on PowerPoint. So if you really, really do want to do that, you don't have to go and refine the images. They're there for you. So if you want to show them those images, feel absolutely free to do so. I just want to remind you that you don't need to make PowerPoints to make this curriculum work. Structured discussion, hopefully that's really familiar now. There's a link there to a blog that I wrote a few years ago about how to do it. And there's also a National College video of me having a go at structured discussion with a class at Cliff Park Academy if you want to have a look at that. All right, these are the topics in the unit. So it starts off looking at the origins of the King James Bible, where that came from. And it's really, I think, a really exciting, interesting story. William Tyndale, one of the most important unsung heroes of English, doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. You might not know about him either. Look in the teacher guide; it's all in there. And so that first bit is focused on Tyndale, and then looking at some of the initial extracts from the anthology, looking at the creation story and Adam and Eve. And there's also an extract from Milton's Paradise. That's a very short extract, works very well for fluency. The key point there is not to analyse bits of Milton, is just to show, look at how the Adam and Eve story inspired future writers. And Milton's interesting because the King James Bible was relatively recent and new, and when he was writing, it would have been a pretty trendy text that's out there for aspiring poets. And then we look at Noah's Ark in some detail. We look at two different heroes, and the idea of heroism is really deconstructed. So it's building on what children have learned about heroes in Year 7 from ancient origins and legends and romance, and looking at are David and Samson heroic in the way that ancient heroes or legendary heroes are? Are they heroic in the modern sense? They're both dubious characters in different ways, and that's highlighted. Then we've got some biblical poetry. We look at some Psalms, a little bit of the less raunchy bits of Song of Solomon, and again, lots of reading fluency. Don't analyse them to death. Do lots of metaphor work there. That would be top recommendation there. And then we've got the wise men bit, which is looking at Solomon and Daniel, and then we've got a New Testament section, which is a fairly brief summary of a few New Testament stories. So we've got a bit of the Nativity, got the Sermon on the Mount as one of the most influential passages from the Bible. Got Lazarus from John's Gospel, and then there's the Road to Damascus story of St. Paul. And then we look at Pilgrim's Progress. Underrated. I think we just look in detail at the author's apology at the beginning of Pilgrim's Progress, and again, do it for fluency. It's a lovely metrical text. It works really well. Children will enjoy it if done like that. They won't enjoy it if you bore them to death with the ins and outs of everything. There's lots and lots of notes in the teacher's guide if you want to know lots of detail about it. But I would be very cautious about doing too much of that with students. And then it's taken up to date with looking at some poetry inspired by the Bible. So a bit of Blake, a bit of Dickinson, and then just because it works, Bob Marley. Bob Marley was obsessed with the King James Bible, so we look at some of his song lyrics just to bring it to somewhere, a place that students might recognise. Right, okay, so medium-term planning. This is what it looks like. Actually, it's, in the teacher guide, it's changed ever so slightly. You might have noticed the expert knowledge column is now in a box beneath to let everything else have a bit more space. But the questions column is very much about guiding your planning. I'm not interested particularly about written responses to those questions. Those are the sorts of things that you might want to be discussing that you're enabling students to answer rather than checking that they actually have. But what should students be thinking about during your lessons? That's what's going on with that column. The core knowledge is the stuff that that we recommend that you should be teaching. A lot of that, not all of it, a lot of that is picked up in the assessment. And it sort of tells you which texts you need to be looking at there. But so it's just summarising some core nuggets of information which you should be weaving in to your lessons. And then in the expert knowledge column, that's stuff that it's interesting, but you make a judgment for your class. It's not assessed. We don't put it in the assessment because we're recognising that not everyone's going to teach it. It's just for you to look at and make decisions on and judgments if you think it would work for you and your class. So that's up to you to decide. And then we've got the vocabulary. So the terminology and the excellent epithets are what you're doing there. So the terminology there, epic, testament, appositive and thesis. We want them to learn that terminology. That's going to be useful to them across their journey through English. And then in bold, you've got the epithets. So they really need teaching those. The ones underneath there, heresy, authoritative, permeate, all the rest of it, those are words which will come up in texts. You might want to do a little bit of light touch teaching. You might just want to think, oh, okay, let me just think about what the synonyms for those are so I can just drop them in when we're reading. But you don't. It's up to you whether or not you're going to do active vocab instruction for those additional words. But they're there to flag up that that you might want to. And then you've got the task column, which gives you some suggestions for structured discussions, prompts. So we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about why people cared about the Bible in English. So you're reactivating the knowledge, and then you're asking them, why do you think people cared? I think people cared about the English because, right, what did he just say? All of that sort of stuff. And then we've got some Couch to 5K writing tasks. But by all means, it's important in this particular image there aren't slow writing tasks added, but do please add those as well. And then some suggestions for reading fluency. So you can look at the medium plan document on its own, isolated at that link there, and you can see everything as an overview, as a glance. Okay, so lesson planning. How does this work with lesson planning? So this is the up-to-date, that image is taken from the up-to-date teacher guide, so you can see lovely blue column headings, and then the expert knowledge sectioned off at the bottom to make it a bit clearer that it's optional. Right, so how would I use this to plan lessons? And I think that's one of the key things. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is looking at the big question. So, is the Bible a piece of literature? And why did it matter to people so much in the past? So those are the things that I'm wanting children to be thinking about throughout the topic. The key questions are ones which I might pose during individual lessons, and so this lesson, actually, I'm going to use that question. Why did Tyndale why has he had such an influence on English? Not of English. There's a typo there for the observant. Apologies. And so that's what I'm going to get them to be thinking about. And so I'll pose that question. We might do some discussion of it. We might do some writing around it. But I want them to be thinking about it. So what am I going to read? Well, I'm going to be reading the life of Tyndale. So that's page 5 of the anthology. Read the annotations in the teacher guide. So check. It has all sorts of additional detail and prompts for discussions in the teacher guide. So you've got to be reading that. To help you do this, and then you think to yourself, which of those things that I've read about do I bring to my lesson and my students? Not all, but the more knowledge you have going in, the richer your teaching can be. So, key point to teach for this particular lesson is the Bible was only available in Latin. And because it was only available in Latin, most people couldn't read it, and they had to take the word of somebody else about what it said, and that meant that people could make stuff up and say, well, it's in the Bible, and normal people didn't have the ability to go and check. So that was a big deal. So that's something I want to particularly teach. The vocab that I want to be teaching, well, I want to be teaching, in this case, Tyndale's excellent epithets, so they're in bold, but particularly I'm going to focus on erudite and dauntless in this particular lesson. And the discussion we're going to have is this. So I'm going to use those epithets to have that discussion. There's the Couch to 5K activity that I might do, and that breaks it down. And then if we've got time, we might also do some teaching of the past participle start. If I haven't taught that before, I might just teach them and get them to do an example on mini whiteboards of the past participle start to sum up, wrap up everything they've learned about that lesson. So that's how I'd use the teacher guide to plan lessons. It should be as quick as that. Obviously, I'm making it look quicker than it is. I wrote the teacher guide and I know what's in there. What should take the time is reading the teacher guide. If you're reading the teacher guide, that is lesson planning. That should enable you to think, what questions do I want children to think about? What are we going to read? What am I explicitly going to teach? Where's the vocab? Are we going to have a discussion? Where's the writing? It enables you to do all of that and answer those questions really, really quickly and easily. And if it isn't working like that, either I've got it badly wrong and you need to let me know, or you're not doing it right. If someone else is doing the planning for you on a PowerPoint and you're looking at their slides, you won't have the understanding to do this flexibly. So look at your teacher guide. That's the best advice I can give you. Right, key points, things to take away from having thought about all this stuff. Firstly, if you're not having fun with this, you're not doing it right. You can have fun with it. So if it's feeling laborious and difficult and challenging and everyone's like, oh, do it differently. For God's sake, stop doing what you're doing and have fun with it. So more reading, more fluency, lighter touch. There's a lot of stuff in the teacher guide that is there for you as a teacher, as a professional. It's not most of that stuff is not intended for your students. It's subject development for you. Some of that will leak into your students. Most of it won't. So if you're not enjoying it, if it's feeling like a big mission, stop doing what you're doing and just have a ball. It should be fun. Those Bible stories are entertaining. They're crazy. They can provoke really rich discussions. That's the better option. So if something's just doing your head in and you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to teach this? Look, just summarise it and skip it. Please, don't torture anything to death. If you're struggling to understand something, then obviously that's on me. So get in touch. Tell me I'm struggling to understand something. But if you are struggling to understand something, it's probably not crucial. Skip it. Right, so again, a similar point. Some of those Bible extracts, the language is unapologetically difficult. We discussed whether we'd put more modern versions of the story, but we wanted students to have this experience of the language of the King James. It's for my money, the best translation of the Bible that's out there, and that language has been so influential on the development of English. But that means it can be a real barrier for students. So use echo reading to break it down and bring it alive. If you're not sure at any point, go back to your CREs. If you're teaching your CREs, you're doing the right thing. If you're not, then rethink. The ones that are highlighted in yellow, those are the most crucial. And then finally, just be really, really, really focused on not just the writing. Those are easy to miss. It's easy to miss I've got to do sufficient practice of the deconstructed essay and the slow writing sentences. But the thing I most want your students to come away from this with is this idea that the Bible has been hugely influential on the language and on our literature. If they come away knowing that single thing, I'll be happy. I hope you found some of this interesting and useful. And any questions, any difficulties, just get in touch. Thank you.